Today is a very special episode of Diplo TV. I'm Nasuplana and I'm joined here by Professor Alexis Roig, who has recently traveled to Pakistan for the annual 2026 Think Fest, which was happening in Lahore this past weekend, and also to deliver a specialized training session at the Foreign Service Academy of Pakistan. Professor Roche is the CEO of SciTech DiploHub, which is a public private partnership in Spain that is working to position Barcelona as a model city and a global hub of science diplomacy. A model that can be replicated in other cities of the world as well. He's also a researcher at the United Nations University and the Barcelona Center for International Affairs. Professor Roche has, to his credit, over 15 years of experience where he has been advising ministries of foreign affairs in science and innovation policies and how to forge transnational partnerships and collaborations around science and innovation policies. He's also the founder and board member of numerous nonprofit think tanks and organizations which are working on public diplomacy, on science advising, and on innovation policy. What makes this episode particularly interesting is the fact that not many of us are aware of what science diplomacy entails. So, while talking to Professor Roche, we will naturally be uncovering questions around science diplomacy, what it is, how this is different from the various traditional channels of diplomacy, and why this matters for Pakistan. Professor Roche, I'll begin by asking that your work sits at the intersection of entrepreneurship, academia, and diplomacy. And you have not been working in just one city or one region, but you have worked in multiple cities and multiple regions and across continents. If I have to be specific, let's say Latin America and Europe as well. So, and now you are also keen to work in South Asia and to bring science diplomacy here as well. So I would very much like to know how has this journey been for you and what experiences have shaped you into who you are today.
Thank you so much for hosting me today and for this question. I would say there is not an easy answer because I have the feeling that if I could go back 10, 15, 20 years ago, I would have never said that today I would be working in science and diplomacy. I'm a computer scientist by training, so I wasn't expecting to end up working in international relations. But along my career, I spent over a decade living in China and doing many projects. I early started cooperating with scientific institutions and supporting them in their international engagements. And this rapidly moved into becoming what we call now science diplomacy or science and technology diplomacy. So in this path, having a scientific or technological background really helped, really supported. And then obviously, as we all do nowadays, you keep training yourself along the way, along your career. And as you were saying, having been able for the last 15, 20 years to support different countries, particularly in Europe, East Asia, and Latin America, in deploying their own science diplomacy strategies, in training the next generation of science diplomats in all these countries, is something that I should say I feel really proud about, having doing my small contribution into this. And I see more and more science diplomacy happening in South and Central Asia, and Pakistan is definitely playing an important role in leading this trend in the region.
Sure, thank you. Professor, as Barcelona's chief science and tech envoy, what role do you believe that cities can play in international cooperation around science and technology and innovation cooperation?
Yeah, that's a really relevant point. Obviously, when we talk about diplomacy, the first thing that comes to our minds are nation states or international organizations, because the international system has been built around this, around the idea of nation states, and the UN system is mainly a club of nation states. But we are seeing more and more subnational governments and other levels of governments engaging in international relations. So a few years ago, when we started working in science diplomacy for the city of Barcelona, we identify two main trends. On the one side, that cities were more and more engaging in international relations and having their own forms of city diplomacy or para diplomacy or subnational diplomacy, having their own offices of international relations, having their own strategy to be somehow represented, maybe through networks or through groups of cities before UN agencies or other international organizations. And on the other side, there was another obvious trend, which is talent, scientific institutions, technological companies are mainly based in urban areas. So while cities were hosting most of the knowledge and scientific institutions, and at the same time they were committing more and more in deploying their own form of diplomacy, it was just about time that cities also started working in science and technology diplomacy. And this is why in 2018, we made Barcelona the world's first city with a science diplomacy strategy. All the rectors of all the universities in the city, all the directors of the research centers, all the former mayors alive of the city from all different political parties and ideologies, uh, together with other practitioners of science, technology, and international relations, they came together to launch what it was called at the time the Barcelona Manifesto. And it was the beginning of cities working in science diplomacy. Obviously, in the case of Barcelona, it took place with the creation of an entity and also the role, this position that I had the privilege to serve as chief science and tech envoy of the city. But now we see other cities like Geneva, like Boston, like Shenzhen, like Mexico City, also engaging in science diplomacy and having their own science diplomacy strategies as a city. So I think this is a global trend, and we need to understand that this is just yet another complement of obviously what nations do. It's not one thing or one approach against the other, but just having other relevant players doing their part in science diplomacy.
Great, great. Professor Raj, you have engaged with countries across different regions, and that also includes your new interest in South Asia. So, our audience would like to hear what do you feel? What impression do you carry of Pakistan in terms of the talent that this country has, and in terms of the science and technology potential that is here, and in terms of how it can become, or it already maybe is a part of the global knowledge and networking networks around science, diplomacy, and innovation.
I think Pakistan is already part of these networks. I mean, first of all, it is obvious that in terms of higher education institutions, Pakistan is really strong. That Pakistan has a big young population eager to learn. I mean, during this week, I was engaging with many students and young people in the different events and presentations I was attending, and you could see the curiosity and the willingness to learn and try new things that young people had. So this is a great and awesome opportunity for the countries to leverage all these young talent. Obviously, then there's also the challenge of the so-called brain drain and talent mobility. But I also think that all these people that goes, many of them come back, and I think this should be approached rather as a brain
Constructive.
circulation, maybe not only brain drain. And I also think that from a science diplomacy perspective, this scientific or knowledge diaspora should also be leveraged. I mean, some of our talent might come back, some others might not, and they might stay wherever they are. But by having them in institutions or in positions of influence in foreign institutions, universities, research centers, foreign companies, this is also an asset for the country. So strategizing this is also a great tool for Pakistan. And then also in the region, I don't know, for example, here is Islamabad hosts ComStech, which is like the science and tech branch of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which is a recognition that in the Muslim world, Pakistan is leading in science and technology. So I do think there is plenty of opportunities. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs started working a few years ago on their own science diplomacy initiative. So this is already taking a real form in the Foreign Office, and I think there is plenty of opportunities coming ahead.
Thank you. Uh, Finally, I would like to ask what message would you want to get across to young professionals who, like you, are pursuing very non-linear career paths and paths that are that cannot be classified as one traditional career, but an intermix of different careers. So, what message would you like to give them? Because this is a challenging trajectory that they are
Totally.
navigating. Um, and especially people who are looking to make an impact in world, and are not just concerned about self-serving careers, but careers that transcend their self and make an impact. Yeah.
That's a great question because I get asked many times about careers in science diplomacy. And as you were saying, there are careers that are very linear. If you want to be a doctor, you study medicine and then you do an exam and then you're a doctor. And if you want to be a traditional diplomat, or at least as it used to be, I mean, you need to study in a diplomatic academy and so on. Or if you want to be a lawyer, I mean, we have plenty of examples. But in the case of science diplomacy, it's really transdisciplinary. So it's not that we need or we have one single kind of profile working in science diplomacy. We do need professionals with backgrounds in diplomacy, in international relations, in public policy, and so on. But we also need people with knowledge and experience from the sciences. And here, when I say science, I mean obviously natural sciences, but also social sciences and humanities, people with these more academic backgrounds. And we need both profiles to get trained into science diplomacy. I get this question asked many times. Like when I train diplomats alone into science diplomacy, they feel like they have a disadvantage compared to scientists to work in science diplomacy. And when I train scientists, they feel the opposite thing, or all the same thing as the others, that they are in the less privileged position to become science diplomats because they don't know about international relations. And I always tell them that we need both profiles, and that's why many of the trainings we do is with mixed badges of participants. So there's also this peer-to-peer learning experience. So my advice would be, obviously, you need to be knowledgeable about the international landscape, international relations, and the soft skills that we usually relate to diplomacy, which is like knowing some languages, having this appreciation for diversity of cultures and so on, empathy, capacity of negotiation, and so on. But also that you're knowledgeable on some areas of knowledge in the natural sciences or social sciences. And then many jobs out there or many positions out there are not necessarily labeled as science diplomacy. You might be working in an international organization, at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, or even in a private company where you need to bring scientific knowledge. Think about health, think about climate, think about AI and other digital technologies. You need the technical knowledge, but also you need to deal with different partners. It might be government, might be other stakeholders. So these roles of science diplomacy are not necessarily called science diplomacy, or you might not be calling yourself a science diplomat, but you are working in science diplomacy. So I really encourage young professionals with this interest of making an impact in those topics to try to train themselves to participate in the many trainings that are out there in science diplomacy, engage with events and institutions like the ones that the Diplomatic Insight does, and try to make sure that they are also part of this big wave of young professionals entering the world of science and technology diplomacy.
Thank you so much, Dr. Raj. This was such a great conversation, and we are pretty hopeful that it helped answer many of the questions that people have and must have regarding science diplomacy. Thank you, Raj.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.